Being an athlete that's played contact sports for as long as I have, and you become aware of the repercussions of bashing your head into another person, or, you know, concussion like syndromes that can come from these contact sports. You're looking for ways to reduce that impact. Any other way you would do it when it comes to, soft tissue injuries? What are the preventive measures you can take? And so when Q Collar came about, it was, wow, here's an actual device that can help prevent concussions. And seeing all the science that was behind it, reinforcing their claims on how it can support athletes, wanted to try it.
There's a new device on the market that is claiming to help protect the brain. It's called the Q Collar. Q Collar is this $200 device worn around the neck that applies compression to the jugular vein, which in turn increases blood volume in the brain. And it's this increased blood volume that the device's inventor has claimed mimics what happens in woodpeckers, that helps the birds protect their brains when they peck.
Conventional thinking to solve the brain injury epidemic in sports has been focused on protection from the outside. A team of doctors came together with a different idea: to look for the solution from inside the body. They studied the evolution of animals whose very means of survival is to hit their heads. Nature reveals that the prevention of brain injury comes from the prevention of brain movement. But how to achieve this in humans? Their research indicated that by manipulating the body's blood flow, you can create a tighter fit for the brain inside the skull. They put their idea to the test in the lab. This initial study showed that jugular compression reduced torn fibers in the brain by more than 80%. With this groundbreaking research, the innovators turned their focus to partnering with a team to develop an externally worn device that could help reduce the brain's movement safely and comfortably. Q30 and the Q Collar were born. 6 years, more than 20 studies, and over 1,000 participants later, research has consistently shown the Q Collar helps protect the brain from sports-related impacts.
The BMJ was approached last year by a professor who studies sports injury prevention, who was saying that the data behind the Q Collar was not reliable.
The unfortunate part of that is that there's no evidence that woodpeckers actually utilize this mechanism to protect their brains. I'm James Smoliga, and I am a professor at Tufts University School of Medicine within the Department of Rehabilitation Sciences. I work in the field of sports injury prevention and rehabilitation and sports performance optimization. The woodpeckers have been extensively studied, including since the 1970s. There's a paper published in the Lancet about how do woodpeckers protect their brain, and there's been a lot of work done by ornithologists and engineers and physicians since then, trying to figure out how woodpeckers protect their brains. And basically, jugular compression isn't one of those mechanisms.
James first got interested in the Q Collar after reading a paper co-authored by the device's inventor, which stated that athletes experience less concussions at higher altitudes, and speculated that this was due to increased blood flow at higher altitudes, leading to a tighter fit around the brain.
I walked into my office one day and a colleague said to me, there's a new paper that just came out that said that the risk of concussion is lower at high altitudes. And I said, oh, that's interesting. How high of the altitude? And he said 600 feet above sea level. I said, well, no, that can't be right. 600 feet above sea level isn't enough to make any physiologic difference on, the brain.
It started with the altitude paper, but over the next few years, James began to catalog many problems with the science underlying Q Collar, and he's managed to get other scientists interested. Most recently, he's been working with Mu Yang, a behavioral neuroscientist from Columbia University.
I am a scientist at Columbia University, but the reason why I'm here is because I'm a sleuth. Sleuth is basically a science detective. So I have caused over 200 papers to be retracted.
James asked Mu to look at some of the Q Collar papers that have been published in the Journal of Neurotrauma. 2 papers in particular caught Mu's attention. One study presented results of Q Collar in around 70 female high school soccer players. The other paper was of 23 male SWAT team members, but the 2 papers presented the same data.
I think on the second day, I text Jamie and I said, you owe me a beer. And he's like, what? And I showed him 2 tables from 2 papers they contain absolutely identical data. And then if you look at the figure legend, you see that the description of the subject are completely different.
Yeah, essentially two different tables with basically slightly different headers. The soccer study said preseason, postseason. The SWAT study said pre-training, post-training. The number of subjects differed within the table between groups, but yet all 96 cells of data were exactly identical. Some cells went to 3 decimal points, and all 3 decimal points were identical. There's no way that was coincidence. And there's the only explanation was that they copied and pasted the table, updated all the headers and all the subject numbers and changed, everything in the columns and rows, but then somehow forgot to update the most important part, the actual data, which is, in my opinion, kind of a ridiculous explanation. And the way I like to think about it is, regardless of intention, we can't trust this. And which one of these is the real table? Which image is the right image? And what else lurks beneath that we haven't noticed? If somebody made, let's call it an innocent error, if they made an innocent error for one of the key pieces of data or one of the key images, what else is there that's also an error that we're not noticing? So regardless of intention, when we see objective evidence like this, we can't trust any of it, in my opinion.
We asked the journal that published these studies, and they told us that it would publish Jamie and Moo's letter documenting their concerns, as well as responses from the authors, once their investigation into the data anomalies had concluded. At this point in time, they have issued an expression of concern for 6 papers, noting their ongoing investigation. As part of this investigative work, the BMJ approached Greg Meyer, who led the studies. Dr. Meyer told us,
"In a few cases where minor reporting errors were identified, we worked closely with the journals and issued corrections or published core agenda. Importantly, none of the raised issues altered the conclusions of the studies. No previously unreported benefits of the collar were introduced, nor were statistically significant findings changed. We remain committed to the highest standards of academic integrity and transparency, and we will continue to correct any genuine errors in our published work."
And David Smith, the device's inventor, told us,
"Upon hearing this idea, I looked into well-studied, non-endangered species that had omohyoid ligaments that could be investigated. Since woodpeckers are endangered, they couldn't be studied. In response to your investigation, note that I disclosed my inventorship on the articles, and I never touched an animal, nor human subject, nor did I ever touch the data. Our studies were performed at top research organizations."
NFL players are always looking for an edge on the field and turn to science and technology to help them out, as Johnny Townsend, who we heard from the beginning, explained to me.
Well, I think helmet technology has come such a long ways. I have two helmets behind me, 2 different generations of NFL style helmets. I'll show them to you real quick while we're here. So this was a 2018, 2019 version of the Rydell Speed helmet. It was what we call just a bucket. The padding was pretty old school. It just has, air suspension systems within it. Chin strap hasn't changed very much, but helmet technology, even 2 years after, the Speed Flex version came out, and it has all of these different pads that help absorb, the shocks of helmet to helmet contact, contact with the ground. And so it's nice to know that equipment has kind of like really developed along the time I was playing, and you can notice, the health effects from it as well. When as an athlete, again, we're not scientists, so we don't really understand how data works. We just understand the cause and the effect. And one circumstance is by trying it and making the assessment for yourself. And then the second, side of things is just blindly trusting individuals that are scientists and those that do have data to support their claims.
Scientific claims led Johnny to try the Q collar to see if it might work for him.
Didn't notice too much of a change, honestly, in the effects between one run versus the other. But I've, beyond that, wore it longer and longer to see if there was some sort of, trend I could notice in the effects. And unfortunately didn't pick up on too much. I've talked to a lot of NFL guys as well that wear them because, part of my evaluation of whether or not I would continue using it was the feedback of peers that I trust and guys that have played contact sports also for a long time. But at more dangerous positions like running back, linebacker, offensive line. And getting their feedback was important. And the majority that I got from them was pretty similar to my experience. Didn't really notice any positive or negative effect from wearing it, but they just chose to continue wearing it because if it could potentially help, why not just wear it just in case?
One way a company can fortify its scientific credentials and obviously boost its sales is to have FDA authorize its product. This happened for Q30, the company that makes Q-Collar, in 2021. This surprised James and Moo, as they had seen these problems with the publicly available research on Q-Collar, and they wondered what data the company had provided to FDA to get such an authorization. So they requested that data via a Freedom of Information request. What they found was that the FDA had also found numerous problems with the Q-Collar studies. It wasn't anywhere close to a glowing endorsement.
And so what the Freedom of Information Act to the FDA revealed, the documentation revealed, is the FDA wasn't convinced that this product actually was effective at protecting the brain. And so shortly before it got authorized, there were still people in the FDA saying, no, we don't believe that the methods are well enough designed to show effectiveness and the data don't demonstrate effectiveness.
The FDA is saying that the data they looked at doesn't show that the Q-Collar prevents concussion, but even more, that the clinical meaningfulness of the kind of brain imaging the company was doing isn't clear. Despite this reservation about the science, Jamie and Moo found that instead of rejecting the device, FDA authorized it, but required that Q-Collar disclose the lack of evidence around the prevention of concussion into the fine print of the product's labeling, something few people are ever likely to notice. The FDA confirmed this in a response to the BMJ, stating that the clinical study data reviewed by the FDA
supported the safety and effectiveness of this device as an aid in the protection of the brain from effects associated with repetitive subconcussive head impacts. The data do not demonstrate that the device can prevent concussion or serious brain injury.
However, as you can see from this recent promotional video by the device's manufacturer, you'd never know the FDA had any doubts about the science.
Q-Collar is a non-invasive device worn around the neck. It's applying a very exacting amount of pressure, which allows for a backfilling, and there's more fluid being held in the brain, so the brain can't slosh or move inside the head. We reduce injury caused by repetitive subconcussive impacts. That could be what's going to minimize these longer-term health conditions, whether it's dementia, whether it's CTE.
And the BMJ could not locate anywhere on the manufacturer's website the same caveats about the data that the FDA requires them to add to their manual. And that can leave the target customer for Q-Collar, people like Johnny Townsend, with the impression that the science on Q-Collar is much more certain than it actually is. It turns out that if in the fine print essentially of the manual, like the user guide for the product, there's a sentence, I'll read it to you. Data do not demonstrate that the device can prevent concussion or serious head injury.
That goes against everything that they claim, right?
It is. It is sort of astonishing, and there's no additional sentences around it. It's just one bullet amongst a whole bunch on page, I forget, 10 of the 15-page manual or something like that. It's pretty astonishing.
People have this perception that if they wear this $200 piece of plastic and metal around their neck, that their brains are going to be safe. And it's a quick fix. And what we know, a lot of times quick fixes don't work.
So what I found really interesting about this story is that this is an area where there's this dire need for protection of the brain. People want to prevent concussions. And now there's this device that everybody thinks the FDA has authorized to prevent concussions. But when you look at the fine print, that core claim around concussions actually is not proven. And it's stated there in black and white. But who's going to have the time to find the fine print? And so everybody's projecting this benefit onto the device, but when you look carefully, it's just not proven.